Well, hey there. It's my nerd world, and welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice, for another A Star Wars podcast. All right, this week on the show, here's the deal. We got some listener feedback. We'll wrap up the show as we always do with listener feedback. I appreciate you guys writing in. Plus, we'll dive into an article that I have here in my hot hands. Jon Favreau on whether Thrawn, Mara Jade, could be in The Mandalorian. We'll do something a little bit unconventional this week. I mentioned on last week's show an article that I had talking about how spoilers could potentially make you enjoy stories more. I'm actually going to bring to you some points from this article, even though it's not specifically Star Wars related, because we have got a ton of spoilers to get into this week. I'm warning you right now. There's a lot of spoiling and leaking going on from very credible sources, and I'm going to give you all of the latest, including some stuff that's just broke within the past few hours on the show this week. Really looking forward to getting into all the Star Wars, so let us not waste any more time.
We've passed on all we know. 1,000 generations live in you now. But this is your fight. We'll always be with you. No one's ever really gone.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
Hey, what are your Star Wars habits? I haven't talked about this before on the show, and I'm genuinely curious. What are your Star Wars go-tos? How often do you watch the films? Do you take in the ancillary material? How much comic book or book reading do you do? I would really love to hear from you and find out how you celebrate Star Wars on a weekly basis. I'm incredibly interested to know what it is you guys do. I talk about it a lot on the show, obviously, the amount of Star Wars that I watch, and I find different ways to, I guess, celebrate the fandom is the best way to phrase it. But I find a lot of ways to sort of satisfy my need to fill my life with more Star Wars, and I do that not just with Star Wars material, but also with content that was made by Star Wars creators. And so like I've had Star Trek Into Darkness sitting in I have an old CD wallet that I now use as a Blu-ray wallet, and I usually fill it up with movies that I have the intention of watching. That way I don't have to go searching through my collection. I was like, oh, I want to watch this soon. So I like going back and watching, movies by Rian Johnson, whether it's Looper or Brothers Bloom. I like going back and watching J.J. Abrams movies. We've been working through the Clone Wars series, me and my 12-year-old son. But I'd love to hear from you and find out what you do. How often do you watch the movies? Which movies do you watch? Do you have any sort of rituals around the films? Like sometimes I have a hard time like jumping in the middle of a series. Like if I'm going to go and watch, say Attack of the Clones, it's like, well, I really kind of want to watch The Phantom Menace beforehand. So TalkShowNerd at gmail.com and leave a comment up on YouTube. Let me know sort of what your Star Wars habits are. I guess probably the best way to put it. All right, so as I mentioned at the start of the show, got a number of different things to get to this week. Specifically, this article about the Mandalorian. I will share with you some points, a little bit unconventional for the show, but it's relevant to the core portion of the show this week. spoilers make you enjoy movies more. This study that was done out of the University of California. And then we'll dive into just a massive amount of spoilers coming from MakingStarWars.net, Jason Ward, and then also a few things that have been sprinkled in from a recent leaker in Jedi Paxis, and also Bespin Bulletin, who's been putting out quite a bit of information as well. I love everything that I'm hearing. The one thing we'll really zero in on is a very detailed breakdown of apparently how the movie opens. And for as much as I would like the movie to open a certain way, I'm really excited for if this is the way that The Rise of Skywalker does actually begin. I'm really excited for what this could mean for the entire film. I'm really jazzed about this whole thing, especially as we get more and more information. But let's start off here. There's an article that just came out from Entertainment Weekly yesterday, and it's about The Mandalorian. We haven't talked a lot about the show. I'm really excited for The Mandalorian. My heart is with The Rise of Skywalker, but I will certainly be taking in The Mandalorian as soon as it arrives on the Disney Plus streaming service, along with the Disney Plus streaming service. But there's an article here from Entertainment Weekly that says, could two fan favorites from the expanded universe show up in a live-action production for the first time? Mandalorian showrunner Jon Favreau isn't ruling it out. So Entertainment Weekly asked Jon Favreau about his upcoming Disney Plus series, and if it could ever include characters like Grand Admiral Thrawn or Mara Jade. Again, names familiar to fans of author Timothy Zahn's best-selling Star Wars novels, as well as other works such as Jedi Knight Mysteries of the Sith game and the Rebels animated series, the latter of which is considered canon. So the article goes on to say, Disney rebranded the expanded universe's Legends back in 2014 and made its content no longer officially canon. But Favreau says he's interested in tapping at least some of the sprawling legends created for The Mandalorian. He says this, so I asked if, arguably, the two most popular legend characters, Thrawn and Mara Jade, Thrawn, of course, the blue-skinned Imperial commander who's a brilliant tactician, and Mara Jade, a sarcastic smuggler and fighter who eventually marries Luke Skywalker. Could they show up in his new show? This is what Jon Favreau had to say. I don't want to talk about anything that might be fun for people to discover, Favreau says. We do have conversations. Part of what's fun to see is if we could merge worlds of the original trilogy, the prequels, the sequels, the Clone Wars, and what's been considered canon up to this point, and what's been considered a part of Legends. I think this show offers an opportunity to bring in all those elements, so no matter what your flavor of Star Wars ice cream you like, there will be something to enjoy. But you're asking the right questions. One potential entry point for a Legends or other familiar character has been the introduction of Ming-Na Wen from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., who's been cast in The Mandalorian in a part that's being kept top secret. So is she playing a name that we've previously heard of or somebody new? Favreau would only say we take full advantage of her acting and her action ability. Entertainment Weekly has been covering The Mandalorian extensively over the last few weeks, launching their cover story that happened last week on the first ever live-action TV series, which debuts on November 12th. So, here's my take on this. One, for those that aren't aware, George Lucas has been very vocal about how he didn't like the Mara Jade character in Legends, okay? And I think for a lot of... Mara Jade's one of those characters, too, that I think even a lot of sort of casual hardcore Star Wars fans, but still casual fans, know who Mara Jade is and what her role is in Legends. If she were introduced back into the Star Wars creative content, it's not going to be, at least in my opinion, it's certainly not going to be in the way that she was there in the expanded universe as a love interest for Luke Skywalker. I just don't think they're going to be playing with that. It would be interesting to see if they were to grab onto some of her other aspects and introduce her into the series and not have her attached in that way. I would bet against it, because that would kind of, in my opinion, just be using the Mara Jade name. But, depending on how it's handled, I could see it happen. I'll be honest with you, I'm not very familiar with any of the material around Mara Jade and Luke Skywalker. I did not read a lot of expanded universe material. My fandom in Star Wars has really stuck strictly to the canon. It really has only been I've got a bunch of old comic books, and I like my old comic books, but a lot of the novels I just never really read. It's really funny because I never read a lot of books, even though I've now become an author, which is just odd. But I really, based off of what I know, I don't see a really good pathway to bring her character in without, it's Mara Jade, but she's not attached to Luke Skywalker, so she's not nearly as important. The Thrawn angle is interesting, but again, that one's tough because it really depends on what happens with the resolution to what took place in Rebels. And if he just happens to show up in The Mandalorian, we are going to need an answer as to how he ended up there and what that resolution was from that final season of Star Wars Rebels. Look, all of it just has me excited, to be honest with you. I really do like what Disney has done with pulling from the expanded universe since they bought Lucasfilm from George Lucas. I think they've done a very, very good job of just pulling in certain elements and putting it back into the canon. The real question is going to be when and if we do get that beyond The Mandalorian, when and if we do get that series of movies or maybe live-action TV show that could take place prior to The Phantom Menace in the Old Republic. How much of the expanded universe, Knights of the Old Republic game, are they going to go and play into that? I've made my comments known about that on previous podcasts, so I won't go down that road again. I'm just excited to see what Jon Favreau is going to bring to this new series, and the fact that this new Mandalorian series is taking place right after Return of the Jedi, and so this is outside of the territory we're used to seeing. Right, and as I've said before, I want to move forward in the timeline. And the space between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, I find really, really compelling because we could get that backstory, like we mentioned last week, where we've got some hints that we may see some of the background of the First Order, even beyond the Resistance cartoon, in The Mandalorian. That gets me really, really excited. So I'm willing to just sort of let these characters unfold and see how they're played with. I don't really have a strong opinion either way. If they bring in a Mara Jade, cool. I'm sure you'll execute that really well. If they bring in a Thrawn, I'm sure you'll provide an explanation for that. And again, speaking of fandom, like I did at the start of the show, I'd be curious to hear from you and what you place your importance on in your fandom of Star Wars. Like, I love all aspects of Star Wars. You know that. I've mentioned that many times. But I'm a canon movie guy. That's my that's the meat on my Star Wars bone that I want to gnaw on. I want that mythology. I'm very interested to see when it comes to a show like The Mandalorian, which looks like a lot of fun, visually spectacular. I'm very curious to see what type of mythology that they bring into the series, and if that ends up being something that I sort of adhere or endear myself to in the way that I do the mythology of the saga films. So, and again, we'll have to wait to see here in the next couple of months whether or not that takes place. Everything looks great so far. We know there's going to be another season of The Mandalorian. I'll be honest with you, I'm probably most excited to get some Star Wars content just to ease some of the pressure off of waiting for The Rise of Skywalker, because the more information that we get about that movie, which I'm going to share with you in just a few minutes, the more excited and the more my anticipation level for this film continues to rise, even though I didn't think that it could rise any farther than it's already did. But again, as always, I'd love to hear from you. Drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com, and also leave a comment up on YouTube. And as an example, I mentioned a lot about my Star Wars habits, but the other thing that I've been doing, and again, it's only because of my love of Star Wars that I started writing my own stories. I've picked up where I left off about 34,000 words into the third book in my EMBARK science fiction trilogy. And again, all this creative content being developed and these rumors coming out and the excitement building for Star Wars has really inspired me to sit back down and continue writing my space opera. And that for me really is just an extension of my Star Wars fandom, even though I'm not writing Star Wars. But that's just all a part of it.
When I found you, I saw raw, untamed power. And beyond that, something truly special.
Speaking of Snoke, if you haven't had a chance to check it out yet, the Age of Resistance comic books started to release this week, and the comic book with Snoke and Kylo Ren traveling to Dagobah was released. I've had an opportunity to read it. I'm not going to get a ton into it here. It was interesting. It was really more of a Kylo Ren comic book than it was a Snoke comic book. They didn't provide any more further background on Snoke apart from sort of continuing to establish this horrible relationship that Snoke has and the way that he treats Kylo Ren. I mean, I guess the biggest takeaway from the comic for me was this sort of casting Kylo Ren kind of as a victim because of how abusive Snoke was. I found that to be the most interesting part of it, but in terms of adding to the canon anything of relevancy that we can really pull from, there's not a lot there. There was a moment in the comic book, and I hope I'm not spoiling anything, where Snoke pushes Kylo Ren like off a cliff, and Kylo Ren stops himself before hitting the ground using the Force, and then gently lands. And somebody made a comment of, hey, gee, I wonder if that's going to play into, and this is what happens, right, when you're in speculation mode. I wonder if that plays into maybe how Palpatine saved himself. How he shows up in The Rise of Skywalker. Who knows? Probably not. But again, as I mentioned last week, that's the one question that I still haven't heard the answer to yet that I'm dying to find out is, how does Palpatine make it out of the Death Star 2 to be in this film coming out in December? So hopefully that gets leaked soon. It's interesting. With all the leaks that are coming out, we're getting a lot of detailed stuff, but there's some very key things that we have not gotten information on. That being one of them. The other one being, what's going on with Kylo Ren's helmet. And I've mentioned that many times. There's something up about that helmet. All right, I'm going to break traditional My Nerd World, the Star Wars podcast rules here. If you hate this, by the way, what I'm about to do, please feel free to email me and just say, I didn't really care for it. So there's an article that I have here. It's not Star Wars related, except for the content of the material you can relate to Star Wars. And I had intended on talking about this as an after-show portion of last week's show, but last week's show ran long, and I figured, no, I'll hang on to it. Well, I decided to go ahead and do it in the main portion of the show this week because it's going to be relevant to all of the information that I'm going to be giving you in just a moment. This is an article here. It's called From University of California. And again, if you hate it, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or drop me a comment on YouTube. Please don't message me until after I'm done, and then you let me know whether or not you liked it or not. I'll try to keep it quick. But it's relevant, in my opinion. So the article is out of University of California. Andy Murdoch wrote this. This story is going to be spoiled right from the beginning, but do not worry. According to research by UC San Diego psychology professor Nicholas Christenfeld, spoilers don't ruin a story. They make you enjoy it even more. Now, hopefully you immediately see the relevance of this as we head into talking spoilers about The Rise of Skywalker. And the biggest reason why I wanted to share this with you is perhaps this will change your view on spoilers, depending on if you're a person that doesn't like to be spoiled about certain things. It has changed my view on spoilers to a certain extent. Obviously, I'm not adverse to hearing spoilers or giving spoilers out, but I usually have kind of a breaking point. And after reading this article, I've changed my mind about sort of even giving myself a breaking point on whether or not I want to stop receiving spoilers. The article goes on to say, one more spoiler. In the movie, The Usual Suspects, Kevin Spacey is Kaiser Sose. If you haven't seen it yet, wow, you're really going to love it now. Christian Feld's interest in storytelling was sparked by his daughter's elementary school homework assignment. She wrote a story where someone wakes up in the morning and does one thing, and does another thing, and then does another thing, and then goes to sleep. I tried to explain to her, no, stories need arcs. There needs to be a challenge, and the person overcomes the challenge or succumbs to it, and then has learned something in the end. But as he was explaining it, I thought I said it was his daughter's. He paused to think. Oh, this was but as he was explaining it, Nicholas Christenfeld, he paused to think, does fiction really have to work that way? What makes people enjoy or not enjoy a story? Fiction is a peculiar thing, says Christenfeld. When you stop and think about it, people spend enormous amounts of time devoting themselves to completely made-up stories. I became curious about what it is about fictional narratives that attracts people. If suspense, surprise, satisfying resolutions are the heroes that save the story, spoilers are the villains that try to, well, spoil everything, or at least that's how they're portrayed. If you've ever gone to considerable lengths to avoid hearing who won the big game, who became the latest dragon snack on Game of Thrones, who Kaiser Sose really is, you're in good company. Now let me stop here. I do disagree with one thing, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but sports is a different beast to me. Sports is something that plays out differently. It plays out similarly to how you take in sort of made-up content, but it does play out differently in that the whole thing is very spontaneous and unfolds, and there's little mysteries that you don't even know are getting. I mean, nobody wrote it. It's just playing out before you. So I'm a big NASCAR fan. I can't imagine finding out who won a race and then going back and necessarily watching the race and enjoying it the same way. So sports is different, in my opinion. Chesterfeld decided to put spoilers to the test in the most straightforward way possible by spoiling stories for people. In the initial experiment, his team had subjects read short stories from various genres. One group simply read a story and rated how much they liked it at the end. The other group did the same. But the researchers spoiled the narrative, as if by accident, by giving them a short introduction. In this, the classic story, in which the woman murders her husband with a frozen leg of lamb, said Christenfeld nonchalantly as an example. What we found, remarkably, is if you spoil stories, they actually enjoy them more. Christensen repeated the experiment with 3 different genres: mystery stories containing a whodunit moment, ironic twist stories where a surprise ending crystallizes the whole story, and literary fiction with a neat resolution. Across all 3 genres, spoilers actually were enhancers. Said Christenfeld, the term is wrong. Ironically, a study about spoiling surprise endings had a surprise ending. In retrospect, Christenfeld thinks he should have seen it coming all along. When people go see Romeo and Juliet, they don't think, don't tell me how it ends. All's well that ends well. That one ends well. So there isn't any thought of what these great works of fiction, knowing the ending is going to ruin them. No one watches a romantic comedy truly wondering if the couple will be happy in the end. With a detective story, you can safely assume the detective will eventually solve the case. The point is, really, we're not watching these things for the ending. I point out to the skeptics, people watch these movies more than once happily, and often with increasing pleasure. In a follow-up study, Christenfeld's team tried a variation on the original experiment to identify how and when spoilers work to enhance creative works. This time, instead of letting readers finish the story, Christenfeld's team stopped people before they reached the spoiled ending and asked them how much they were enjoying the piece. If the benefit of the spoilers comes from simply knowing the ending, you wouldn't expect to see any increased enjoyment in the middle of a yarn. Once again, there was a surprise twist. It turns out, even halfway through a story, you enjoy the spoiled story more. Before you get to that spoiled ending, To Christianfeld, this suggests that spoilers help you know the purpose of the overall narrative, so you're able to better incorporate all of the details and plot points that you get in the end. Christianfeld harkens back to The Usual Suspects, in which Kevin Spacey is secretly Kaiser Sose. Okay. If you know the ending as you watch it, you can understand what the filmmaker is doing. You get to see this broader view and essentially understand the story more fluently, explained Christianfeld. There's lots of evidence that this sort of fluent processing of information is pleasurable. That is, some familiarity with a work of art enables you to enjoy it more. Who is Kaiser Sose? Asked Kevin Spacey. Who is Kaiser Sose? In yet another experiment, the researchers added the spoiler directly into the works. We actually modified these stories a little bit of hubris going in and fixing what John Updike wrote, and it turns out we didn't make them better. Extra knowledge about a work of art makes it more enjoyable. When a spoiler is worked into the story itself, it simply makes for a flawed tale. So, does the plot spoil the beauty? Here's what they had to say. Spoilers clear the way. Spoilers clear away the need to think about the plot and allow you to enjoy the rest of the story more. Knowing that Kevin Spacey is Kaiser Sose lets you enjoy the clever construction of The Usual Suspects and appreciate how the director and the screenwriter manipulate the viewer and drop subtle hints along the way. If you're driving up Highway 1 through Big Sur and you know the road really well, you can now peek around and admire the view. The otters frolicking in the surf, said Christianfeld. But if it's your first time on the road, you have to focus on the twists and turns. Will this finding make people rush out and look for spoilers? Almost certainly not. Despite the fact that most people have experienced spoiler enhancing their enjoyment of a story, the vast majority of people still think that spoilers ruin stories in some way. In part, this is due to the fact that we can't experience a story for the first time twice. And this is what I want to get into when I finish this up here. We can't compare the experiences of watching a spoiled and unspoiled movie, and there's only one chance to watch an unspoiled film. In other words, you can only discover once that Kevin Spacey is actually Kaiser Sose. And look, that's where my head's always been on this, and I've mentioned this before on the show. Really, when we're talking about spoilers, we're really only talking about that first time we go and see a film. And specifically here, let's bring it direct. Let's bring it back and directly talk about just Star Wars. Okay, really, all we're talking about now is Star Wars films. Star Wars films are films that I watch over and over and over again. So the question comes down to, the first time you see a particular Star Wars movie, do you want that one experience of being shocked and surprised at how the whole thing wrapped up? Or are you okay with finding out beforehand and then going in to the theater to let the movie play out the way you think it's going to, and being able to kind of relax a little bit, knowing, hey, you know where the ending here is going? That's really going to be subjective to the individual going and seeing the film. As I've said before, my take on this whole thing when it comes to Star Wars spoilers has been, I love this portion of the fandom. I love this portion of playing the game of Star Wars leading up to a new movie or new content. I love, for me, the thrill that I would get the one time of seeing The Rise of Skywalker, completely fresh without knowing anything. Okay. One, I know me well enough to know that going into any Star Wars movie, there's a sense of anticipation, excitement, and nervousness. And this desire to really take everything in, and sometimes it's become overwhelming for me. The Last Jedi was definitely that way. Of the new Star Wars films, that was the one that I went into probably with the least amount of spoilers ahead of time. And it really took the second viewing of that film for me to go and fall in love with it. I think a lot of people who hate The Last Jedi only saw it one time. Now, granted, I know you don't have to write me. Okay. I know there are many people that have tried to give that movie a chance and it still doesn't work for them, and that's totally fine. But I think there's a lot of people out there that saw it one time, hated it, and didn't go back to see it. Because I've also heard from a lot of people that hated it the first time around and then went and saw it a second, third time, and they loved it even more. But for me, getting the spoilers like we're about to here in just a moment, on a daily basis or a weekly basis. I get that same sort of thrill reading what potentially could take place based off of what Bespin Bulletin or Jedi Paxis, or more specifically Jason Ward at MakingStarWars.net has to say. And I love this journey to the movie, because the truth of the matter is I am only going to see The Rise of Skywalker one time for a first time, and I'm going to be seeing it over and over and over again afterwards. And I'd much rather have this time right now to be able to share in the excitement and the speculation and the leaks and, oh my gosh, how is this going to play out? I'd rather have all this right now than not have months of that, to have one single experiment taking place inside of a 2.5 hour moment in time. And again, it's up to personal preference. There's a couple of points in the article that I don't agree with. You know, when he talks about driving on a winding road and you're going to a particular destination, that analogy doesn't really work for me, simply because, well, if you got GPS that's telling you where to go, you can look around at the road as much as you want if it's the first time on it. But be that as it may, just wanted to point that out. So what do you think? Right? How much do spoilers, do you pitch off from the show when you hear spoilers? Did that article change your view at all? Did you hate the fact that I didn't talk about Star Wars for a few minutes? TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Drop me a comment on YouTube. But let's go ahead and get into what I said I was going to get into all along.
The hyperdrive is leaking.
All right, so here's the deal. After that goofy little, this is your leak spoiler warning. I have a number of different articles here. Right? I got a stack of papers. I'm going to work through kind of in order, from when the last Star Wars show posted last weekend up until today, which is Friday. A couple of the spoilers in here and the information gets repeated because these different outlets, Jason Ward at MakingStarWars.net more specifically, have kind of been adding to the things that they've been hearing and posting new videos and stuff along the way. So there'll be some repeating here, but I'm going to share with you what I got, and then we'll comment. And again, sort of gather up your thoughts and leave me comments as you hear these, and let me know what you think. So Bespin Bulletin on Instagram has been doing a fantastic job of compiling what Jason Ward has been saying. So a lot of what I have here is from Bespin Bulletin talking about MakingStarWars.net, and then stuff that MakingStarWars.net actually posted themselves. So Bespin Bulletin writes this. Today, Making Star Wars dropped a new report that digs into reshoots, Rey's powers, and surname. Let's get into it. Making Star Wars says that the reshoots appear to be real. All right, I said last week I didn't think they were, so I was wrong. I can admit when I'm wrong. And he's been hearing of them for the past several weeks. He doubts the original reshoots ever actually ended. Bespin Bulletin reported 2 days of filming happened in Black Park in late July. Making Star Wars says the reshoots are in various places and couldn't say much more. The rumor that George Lucas has been brought on for the reshoots doesn't appear to be true, but Lucas has been a consultant on The Rise of Skywalker, and that's been known for some time. MakingStarWars.net says he doesn't believe the movie is in trouble. Reshoots have happened with previous Star Wars films, and J.J. Abrams is a famous revisionist. You may remember reports that J.J. Abrams was rewriting on set during the principal photography of the, I believe, The Rise of Skywalker. I got in I'm sorry. During principal photography, this is on The Rise of Skywalker, and the actors did some improv. Okay. Quick comment on this, by the way. Going back and watching the Clone Wars series, it's interesting because we've gotten some leaks, and it might be in my stack here. I haven't gone through. I've read all these, but I haven't gone through them since before doing the show today. So I'm kind of refreshing myself while I'm doing the podcast. But I know that when we talk about this Wayfinder devices, these two Wayfinder devices that apparently lead to the location of where Palpatine is. When that was first mentioned, I incorrectly thought like Wayfinder device was going to be sort of the official term. It's not. That's just a description for what these items are. There's some rumors now that they may actually be holocrons. I know Bespin Bulletin reported that they believe they're red holocrons. I only bring that up because watching the Clone Wars cartoon as of late, we're on season 2. And in the Senate Murders episode, I thought it was interesting because one of the characters ends up getting stabbed with a dagger. And I thought that was a little bit different for Star Wars, to have a knife or a dagger play into the plot. And again, the dagger, as we talked about in previous shows, one of the leaks, And the Sith inscription on the dagger that we believe, and we'll get into it with these spoilers, may have killed an informant for the Resistance that may have some information about Rey's parentage and background. And that on the dagger was a Sith inscription, and that's where C-3PO gets the red eyes from, because he's taken to a location where Zori Bliss is, and is basically uploaded with the ability to go and read Sith artifacts. Okay, so holocrons obviously play a big role in the Clone Wars cartoon, and that dagger kind of stuck out, even though one's got nothing to do with the other. The common denominator here is, if George Lucas did work on The Rise of Skywalker, those are very George Lucas things that haven't really been introduced in this Disney era, right? And I really like the idea of introducing holocrons and things of that nature that are so core to Star Wars lore, but haven't really been talked about or shown in the movie-created content. All right, getting back to some of the leaks here. Bespin Bulletin. Making Star Wars reveals he's heard from 2 sources that Rey and crew get attacked by a giant sandworm on Pisana, and during this attack, Rey unveils a new force power, which is the power to heal. Our heroes battle and kill the worm, but Rey uses her power to heal or bring the worm back to life. Making Star Wars reveals that Jedi Paxis also backed up the story, if a little different, saying instead of our heroes almost killing the worm, they are backed into a metaphorical corner, and the healing is what allows our heroes to survive and escape. Making Star Wars speculated that if Rey can heal or bring the creature back to life, then it could play into previous leaks of Kylo Ren getting killed and Rey bringing him back to life. Okay, so first thing is, and this is probably obvious to a lot of people, but I'll put it out there anyways, if a giant worm being involved in this film sounds weird, I present to you the Sarlacc pit, the Rancor, the Reek, the Nexu, the Death Star trash compactor monster, and the list goes on and on and on. J.J. Abrams, as I've said many times, makes rewatchable films. Again, in my opinion. And I think a part of that is because J.J. Abrams doesn't waste a lot of screen time with things that don't push a plot forward. We're not dilly-dallying with things that aren't essential. So he's able to pack a lot into a movie, keep the plot moving forward at the same time, which makes for really compelling films. It is something that inspired me to try to do the same when crafting my stories. I try to make sure that the set pieces, the action sequences are there for a particular reason, not just to entertain, but to move the plot forward. And oftentimes I found out that I may come up with a great idea, but I don't really have a good rationale for having it there, so I have to work through the problem. Okay, how do I make this relevant to the overall story? That's what J.J. Abrams does. So, keeping with Star Wars tradition, we get a new monster, essentially, and on top of that, we get a display of Rey having a force power, as they said here, that could very much play into the end of the film. Making Star Wars also heard of another scene that Rey and Kylo Ren are fighting when a ship goes by, with Rey reaching out to grab the ship, with Kylo doing the same after noticing what Rey is doing. But the big reveal is Rey shoots Force lightning out of her hands, which hits the ship. Making Star Wars also talks about the rumors that the Lars homestead is in The Rise of Skywalker. Jason says that a source told him that in a scene, Rey is walking around the perimeter of the homestead when a civilian notices her and tells her that they haven't seen anybody there in a long time, and asks who she is, with Rey responding with Rey Skywalker. Finally, Making Star Wars briefly mentions that the Matt Smith situation. He says currently things are crazy, with some sources saying he's in it, others saying he isn't. Jason says that he has more stuff he could talk about regarding Matt Smith, but doesn't know the value of that information anymore with reshoots going on. Okay, so that's the first part of the spoilers, and I'm pretty sure it gets into it here. So I think I'm just going to dive right into the next part of this, and if I'm not. We'll just let's go ahead and move forward with these before I speculate any further, because a lot of what we're going to get into expands more on what I just shared with you. All right, so back to more bullet points from Jason Ward and MakingStarWars.net. Jason knows more about the reshoots, but is sworn to secrecy. Says he heard about the reshoots a long time ago for Black Park, and Bespin Bulletin covered it as well as they could, but reshoots were for things we already knew, so he lost interest. There wasn't a lot to say on it. These reshoots, he believes, are a skeleton crew and supposed to be secret. Later says he doesn't know what they're reshooting, knows a little, but doesn't know if they're just adding to it. I don't, I really don't care much about the reshoot talk. I mean, so much of this stuff are items that, if it wasn't for the internet and social networking, we would never have any information on. And that's not to say it's not relevant, but when it comes to reshoots stuff, it oftentimes just gets interpreted as a film being in trouble, and I just don't like the negativity. I can say none of this surprised me. I don't know how to put a movie together. I've never shot a movie, but I've written 2 books and I'm working on a 3rd, and I can tell you that oftentimes, it takes getting the entire thing together before you can kind of go back and make sure everything works the way that it's supposed to work. And I had a situation today where I had stepped away from writing the 3rd book in the EMBARK series to focus on getting on the release of Treasure in Darkness Book 2. The audiobook is heading to retail, should be available any day now. But I had stepped away from that story for several months. And again, just recently sat down to start writing again. And I had to go through the whole thing just to figure out where all of my main characters were, and actually had to go and immediately move some stuff around because it wasn't working with the story that was swirling in my head in the absence since I started writing. So none of this surprises me. Suspected for a while that Poe Dameron would die in Act 3. As his X-Wing was under tarp for quite some time. They didn't think it had much use at the end of the film. In the special look, when we get the shot of the Resistance ships, we see the X-Wings there, we see the A-Wings, the Y-Wings, whatever the new ship is that a lot of people say resembles the Ebon Hawk, and it does to a certain extent. That one X-Wing that's most prominent in frame does appear to be Kylo Ren's X-Wing fighter. It's orange and white. They've released there's a leaked photo that's been released of the Hot Wheel toy for it. It looks awesome. Also, the vintage series carded figures for the Rise of Skywalker. The Poe Dameron one is him in his X-Wing outfit, and it shows his new orange and white X-Wing in the background. So if that is in fact the start of the final battle of the Rise of Skywalker, that's separate from whatever Kylo Ren and Rey are going to be going through, then that would sort of be indicative that Poe Dameron is in that X-Wing. That being said, though, the idea of him dying and not having much use, I mean, all that stuff's going to be done CGI. So once you were done with the physical X-Wing fighter, you wouldn't necessarily need it, right, in physical form anymore. All right. Jason Ward goes on to say, Rey's healing or resurrection powers will come into play later in the film. Okay. Again, stuff that we've speculated on. According to sources. Jason says sources are currently hearing the same as the Jedi Paxis leak. Says not one for one, finds it weird if he and Paxis were being told fake information. Jason says latest stuff comes from the Sith fleet sources. That ended up being correct. Okay. Says the scene where Rey and Kylo play tug of war over a ship on Pisana. I mentioned that a moment ago. The Knights of Ren are there too. One of our heroes is on the ship. It doesn't look good for the character on the ship after Rey accidentally force lightnings the ship, but it is a fake out. So, says the sources who gave him the Sith fleet are saying Rey calls herself Rey Skywalker on Tatooine. Some sources are saying they don't know anything about Matt Smith being in the film. One source suggested they didn't know who was going to be in the Rey's parents' moment. As Jason speculates, perhaps Matt Smith is the father or is the killer. Says sources before Celebration were insistent Matt Smith was in the movie, and Trades said he was in the movie. Calls the situation very weird. Okay. Says Wayfinders have no special powers. Reminds people of something that was mentioned on a previous podcast. How the Wayfinder opens up sands. He says that he now believes that to be the worm. Says the ground opens up and sucks our heroes down. Says Pinewood sources hinted at stuff happening underground that Kylo Ren is involved in. Now, the underground place is apparently somebody named Ochi's tomb. Ochi is the character they believe gets stabbed by the Sith dagger and was a Resistance contact who knew something of Palpatine or unknown regions, which is where they find the Sith dagger. The worm incident happens, and our heroes are able to escape, but they're cut off from the Millennium Falcon, presumably as it was found by the First Order, and Rey has a premonition that Kylo Ren is out there. So she leaves to confront him, leaving Finn and Poe to fix Ochi's ship so they can escape. Rey confronts Kylo in his tie. This is where the jump from the teaser happens. Then Rey cuts it. The tie crashes about 100 meters away. Then Rey and Ren fight. Okay, let me stop here just really quick. Let me mention something. I find this really interesting. First off, starting from the end of this particular piece and moving backwards, I'm still of the opinion this is where the Force Flash fight takes place. That's the shot that we see. I'm of the opinion that's the shot that we see in the special look of Kylo Ren in the blue, walking away from his new TIE fighter, igniting his lightsaber. It looks like snow, but again, we've got the blue, we've got the lightning. I think that's all part of the Force Flash fight. I'm also thinking that the shot of them, as I mentioned last week, on battling on the Death Star 2 wreckage, is also a part of the Force Flash fight. I don't think we've seen anything of the ending yet. And because that poster shows them fighting on the Death Star 2 wreckage and Kylo Ren's got the helmet on, I think that happens at two different times. It is obviously possible that they just added Kylo Ren's helmet to the poster and he never actually wears it while fighting Rey. I don't think that's the case. Again, I don't have the story or the background on that. I don't know how that happens, but obviously Kylo Ren's helmet comes into play somehow, and at some point he puts it on. We just haven't seen the reason why. All right, backing up again a little bit more. The underground place, Ochi's tomb, okay? This is where they find the Sith dagger. This is the dagger that they need to go and take to Kimiji, to where Zori Bliss is, to have C-3PO read it. That's where he gets the red eyes. Okay. Why am I bringing all this up? I'm bringing all this up because of this. The Millennium Falcon gets left behind. So perhaps Rey takes it once this is all over, unless Kylo Ren takes it, okay? Oh, he says presumably it was found by the First Order. Rey has a premonition that Kylo Ren is there. Okay, so raises a question. How do they get off that planet? Here's what I think. Rey probably leaves on that ship, okay, so they can escape. The shot from the teaser trailer of the ship arriving on the planet with the snow that most likely is Kimiji or however you want to pronounce it. That ship, again, looks just like the one that Rey saw in the Force back vision that left her on Jakku. I think Ochi's ship is that ship. Ochi's tomb is the direct connection to Rey and whoever her parents are, Palpatine influenced or not. Kylo Ren takes the Millennium Falcon, right? Which I think is cool, because I think that opens up a lot of possibilities for the end of this movie when all is said and done. Ben is redeemed, and if he's still alive, which I believe he will be, then they've got the Millennium Falcon there and they can get their escape, which goes back to an idea that I had a long time ago about the ending of this movie, Kylo Ren and Rey being in the Millennium Falcon. Okay, so back to what I was laying out here. So I think our heroes, after this Force Flash fight with Kylo Ren, depending on what the outcome is, I think they end up leaving from Pisana on Ochi's ship, and Ochi's ship is the one that Rey saw in her Force back scene, leaving her on Jakku that we saw in The Force Awakens, and it's the same ship that we saw arriving on that snow planet to meet Zori Bliss from the teaser trailer. All right, let's continue. Jason Ward says he heard that Jana was a stormtrooper and got out, and says her and Finn have that bond. Also heard that Maz Kanata is in the start of the film on the Jungle Planet and is in the final battle, but it sounds like she doesn't have much to do. Not a huge surprise there. Jason heard the same description as Bespin Bulletin on the Wayfinders, that they're red pyramids, and says Bespin Bulletin has more coming out on them. He says a long time ago, this probably, and I know this sounds ridiculous, but I'll get into it. You're really going to hear me geek out, okay? Because this probably is the one spoiler part of it that has me the most excited. Jason Ward says a long time ago, he heard a secret Octu set at Pinewood by the paddocks, which had Luke's X-Wing there, and Rey was wearing the helmet. A proven source told Jason that Rey flies the X-Wing. I cannot tell you how much I am dying to see Rey piloting her own ship. Right? One of my favorite moments is, a couple of my favorite moments, but one of my favorite moments is that Millennium Falcon chase scene from The Force Awakens. Again, this is apart from the more emotional elements. I'm just talking from an action standpoint, visual standpoint, things that I love. I love seeing her flying that Millennium Falcon at the beginning of The Force Awakens. That scene is so great. The scene on Crate where she's in the gunner's position, I just think that's fantastic. I love Rey as a character. And as a kid growing up, Luke Skywalker and the X-Wing fighter is just iconic. I mean, that was the stuff of dreams growing up. I mean, that's the stuff that, just inspired me on so many different levels. My bike was my X-Wing fighter, right? When I was a kid, during my BMX racing days, and my, the stories that I write now, and my T-crafts that I created, and my spaceships, wanting to do something that was lived in, but not wanting to copy Star Wars. It was all inspired by that. I love my car. I have a 2014 Kia Forte Coupe. It's metallic blue, and I adore that automobile. They don't even make them anymore, right? I wouldn't even trade it in. I love that car so much. But it's just that singular vehicle and being in it. And having Rey in the helmet and Luke's X-Wing fighter, I just, oh my gosh. I can't even fathom. I'll buy all the toys. He goes on to say, they say Rey steals Kylo Ren's ship after their duel on Endor and flies to Octu, and after landing, she immediately blows it up and throws Skywalker's lightsaber into the wreckage. Luke appears, and then Jason and Randy paraphrase some lines from the scene. Okay, so let me back up here just a skosh before I get into the dialogue. So this sounds weird. Their duel on Endor, again, is this in the Force Flash fight? Timeline-wise, this just seems like it's positioned in an odd place. I don't know when this happens, because this sounds like the moment when Rey gets back into the fight. So there's like a part of me that says this is taking place after Pisana and the Force Flash fight, where they flash fight to Endor, but that doesn't make... So I'm confused about the timeline and all this. Be that as it may, at some point, the leaks say that Rey ends up on Octu. She wants to get out of the fight. She's done. By the way, somebody pointed out something really interesting. And I don't know why my mind hadn't gone there, but it just hadn't gone there. The criticism about Luke Skywalker exile on Octo and Luke Skywalker's art and how he was treated, and people don't like that, right? It's the same thing that Yoda and Obi-Wan did. I mean, they both exiled themselves as well. So it makes sense that Rey would go to try to self-exile herself to get out of this fight for some reason. So here apparently is the way this goes down. So Rey steals Kylo Ren's ship. Oh my gosh, please have her flying Kylo Ren's shuttle or the TIE fighter. That would be awesome too. Sorry. She gets to Octo. She blows it up. Okay. And then she takes Skywalker's lightsaber and she goes to toss it into the wreckage. The original leak was that Luke Skywalker catches it. That's the big moment. So she goes to throw it and he grabs it. Luke appears, and then this is apparently the way the dialogue scene goes down. Luke says, so it's Luke and then Rey. What are you doing? You were right. You saw darkness in me. The Force brought us together. You need to face Sidious as I faced Vader. Rey says, I wanted to feel as if I was as strong as Master Leia, but I'm not. This is interesting based off the leak that I'm going to present at the end of this. We're still going through all this, right? But there's another big leak about how the movie opens, and this would be a callback to that. I wanted to feel as if I was as strong as Master Leia, but I'm not. And boy, doesn't that sound familiar with Kylo Ren wanting to be as strong as Vader. Luke says, you don't know how strong you are until you know how strong you have to be. Sidious will fill you with fear, with anger, and he'll use your weakness against you. Rey asks, what are his? Luke says, Sidious looked into Vader's eyes when my father saved me. He couldn't understand my father's feelings for me. He thought love was a weakness to be used. Jason says that later on, Palpatine thinks he understands it. The family bond, that familial bond, doesn't actually work. Sources told Jason that within the first 20 minutes of the movie that Kylo meets Palpatine, and he wants Rey and Kylo to be Empress and Emperor of his new empire. Sources say Palpatine refers to Rey and Kylo as the dyad, which are basically the positive and negative of the Force. With Rey and Kylo together, Palpatine will use the Force to rejuvenate himself, which was Palpatine's plan all along. With this rejuvenation thing happens, some crazy over-the-top Force lightning thing happens and shoots up into the atmosphere, bringing a resistance ship down. Sometime after Kylo meets Palpatine, Ren tells Hux and Pride that they need to raise an army. The First Order don't appear to know about Palpatine being alive in the unknown regions. Okay, so before we get back into the final and sort of the biggest one of the spoilers that we're going to dive into that came out today, in these spoilers, Jason Ward from MakingStarWars.net does go on to say and reiterate that he does believe that Rey is related to Palpatine somehow. And again, this goes back to the other leak about how Palpatine, in trying to get control of the galaxy and succeed where he'd failed before, he wanted to create some sort of family bond. I still don't know how this can play out. I am fine with this if it happens. My guess is it'll be something along the lines of Palpatine inspiring or using the Force to create life through another individual or a couple or just a female. An almost immaculate conception in the way that Anakin Skywalker was. Unless there's a bigger reveal here that we find out that Anakin was actually created by Palpatine from the beginning as well. I like the fact that Lucas is involved in all of this, if that is indeed the case, because I think that will go a long way when it comes to the fandom accepting of this. The idea at the end of this movie, if for some reason it is still Rey, last woman standing in this whole Skywalker saga, and essentially is a Palpatine, that doesn't bother me, depending on the execution of how that reveal comes about. I think that Kylo Ren will end up living at the end of this after he's redeemed. It'll be Ben Solo. So I like this idea of that balance between the two, where the positive and the negative actually kind of gets reversed, whereas Kylo Ren was coming from the Skywalker bloodline, and Rey was actually born out of some crazy desire from Palpatine, but ends up turning good, and therein it ends up having the balance, okay? I'm curious to get your thoughts, what your speculation is on that. Again, it continues to point towards, and Jason Ward continues to point towards Rey being connected to Palpatine somehow. I honestly, and I tweeted about this and did a blast about this with the Blaster app earlier this week, I hope that she is related to Palpatine, if only because I want to believe that the reason why she fights the way that she does with the stabbing motions in The Force Awakens is because she is a part Palpatine. And because that's the way that Palpatine fights. I really like that idea. That may not even have been part of the plan. It could have just been the way that they trained her. But that would be great if they did know all along and they gave her a few moves that echoed what Palpatine did. I think that would be really, really cool. One more quick point, and then we'll do the last of the spoilers here and get into listener feedback this week. But I wanted to mention, going back to the special look and the quick clip that we get of Kylo Ren and Rey fighting on the Death Star 2 wreckage in the waters on what we believe is Endor. Go back and watch that clip again. Rey does this saber twirl right before she engages with Kylo Ren. It's really cool. It's very, very reminiscent of when my favorite moment of the Praetorian Guard fight in The Last Jedi is when she screams and twirls her saber before she goes after that guard. I just love that. I just love Rey. All right, here's the big one today, and then we'll get to listener feedback. So Jason Ward posted this video today, and let me bring up the exact title again because I just cut and pasted. Let's see. More details on the rumored opening sequence of Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. All right, so here we go. A source reached out after the last update and filled in exactly what the catalyst is that breaks up the opening scene described to me from Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. After the opening crawl, we pan from space. The camera moved towards a planet covered in trees. We see a blue lightsaber dueling a green lightsaber in the distance. Both of the lightsabers are held in hand by two Jedi with white helmets with visors covering their faces, so we cannot immediately recognize if this is Rey with someone new. The two Jedi break from their duel and remove their helmets to reveal Luke Skywalker and Leia Organa looking exactly the age they did in Return of the Jedi on Endor's moon. The movie begins with the flashback. What to expect when you're expecting. I'm told the reason the training is halted in the opening sequence because Return of the Jedi era Luke Skywalker realized something has changed with his sister, Leia Organa. He questions Leia, and she confides in Luke that she's going to be a mother. This is the moment Luke Skywalker realizes Ben Solo is coming and the galaxy will never be the same again. We then hear a voiceover shouting, "Master Leia," causing Rey to end Leia's flashback, and we are thrust into the post-Luke Skywalker era, far from General Leia Organa's training with her brother all those years ago. Now we are with Leia and Rey amongst the trees. Rey trains to become the Jedi that will face off against the evil Supreme Leader that was once the child Leia carried during her training with Luke Skywalker. About a month ago, there was filming being conducted at Black Park near Pinewood Studios, the location where Rey trains and was used again, and makes sense that the additional content pertains to these sequences. For all we know, there's been stuff added. However, it could just be a lot of minor performance changes or shot coverage for a better way to present the sequence. I do seem to remember first hearing of the flashback sequence and it being a secret location within the Pinewood Studios itself. What it might mean. I like how the sequence, says Jason Ward, expands on Leia's character while also showing us one of the moments we always wanted to see after 1983, when we hoped they would make more Star Wars movies that continued the Skywalker story. If this rumor is accurate, in the way that I've heard it described, it sets the tone for Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, hard and fast. This movie is about saving Ben Solo and bringing Rey into the fold. Okay. I love this idea. J.J. Abrams said, and I'm getting the quote wrong, but he basically had made a comment that he felt inspired by what Rian Johnson did, and that when it came to The Rise of Skywalker, he was really going all in. He had been tasked with bringing Star Wars back, essentially, right, from its hiatus after what were controversial prequels, okay? And that he really wanted to go for it with this film. We know that he wasn't the original director of the movie, and I can't help but speculate that I wonder if part of the deal with JJ was, look, if I'm going to make this movie, I want to do it the way that I want to do it. And that would mean we're going to do some things differently. We'll start off with the crawl and the pan down from space, but instead of going to something that is more reminiscent of, say, the beginning of Return of the Jedi or Revenge of the Sith, we're going to open up on this scene. And this is essentially, from the way I'm reading it, unless I'm reading it wrong, and feel free to drop an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment on YouTube. But the way I'm reading it is that what we're seeing is actually a flashback through the mind of Princess Leia. In a moment when she's training Rey. She's recalling back to that training moment with Luke and her. Now, this also could play into the, I think it was Jedi Pax's rumor that at the end of the film, actually the Force ghosts of Leia and Luke show up at the end of the movie to assist Rey and Kylo Ren in defeating Palpatine once and for all. I think that there's probably has been I think that the ending of this film is going to be kept under lock and key, and I don't think it's getting out there. I know we've heard some versions of it, but it would not surprise me, despite some clickbait videos that popped up today about 6 different endings for the movie. No, I think there is a possibility that different endings for the film may have been shot, and only a handful of people know which ending it's going to be, because I know that's the way that they did it for Game of Thrones. But I love the way this is playing out. The only big question mark in my mind is, and I'll reserve judgment, obviously, until I see the film, and I trust that they're going to do a very good job at handling this, but I do wonder, how good is that CGI going to be on making Luke and Leia look like young Luke and Leia, to where it doesn't look like, I thought Tarkin looked fantastic in Rogue One. I thought Leia didn't look quite as good at the end of Rogue One, but I think they've also made a lot of advancements since then, and I also think that the sort of the rise of deep fakes has changed a lot of the technology, and they're incorporating different technology now that's around sort of the deep fake technology to make it even better than we've seen before. So I can only imagine that J.J. Abrams is going to make sure that those younger versions of Luke and Leia look as good as they possibly can, to where we can't even tell the difference. But I love the way that this is setting the whole thing up. Every single one of the things that have been described has me excited, and I desperately, desperately want to see how it ends up playing out. I think this is going to be a fantastic, rich movie, and just an epic conclusion to the saga based off of everything that we've heard so far. Because if this is all the meat and potatoes part of it, despite some things being filled in, what are the Knights of Ren do? What are the battles going to be? We still don't really know what the situation is with them on the skiff in the original teaser trailer at the beginning. Poe, Finn, and C-3PO. So there's a lot of question marks and things that haven't been explained yet. I'll put one more caveat on this, and then we'll get to listener feedback this week, and that is, all this could be bogus, bad information, and none of this happens in the movie. I think that's possible. Probably unlikely, given the fact that we have 3 different pretty credible sources that are confirming with other individuals, and they're cross-confirming them. So I think we're getting pretty close to knowing quite a bit about this film, and I trust a lot of what's been leaked out there, but when it comes to stuff like the ending, I think that's still a big, huge question mark that most people, unless you're J.J. Abrams, aren't going to know. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, and comment on YouTube. All right.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
Let's get into listener feedback this week. All right, the first one comes from Julianne, who says this: I loved that shot of Ben and Rey fighting with the waves crashing around them, because it gave me such an Anakin Obi-Wan vibe from Revenge of the Sith. Before TLJ, I was a fan of the Rey Palpatine theory, but after watching the movie, I just fell in love with Rey Nobody. I'll be fine if they make her a Palpatine, but I would like it more if she somehow manipulated her origin, but not in a clone sort of way. I am so happy for Ryan that Knives Out got such great early reviews, and I can't wait to watch it. All right, friend of the show, Anthea, says this: I love coming here every week for some Star Wars positivity. Thank you, Amy. I appreciate that. Something I heard, some speculation about regarding the recent leaks, is the possibility that some of Colin Trevorrow's script was leaked. I'm not sure, since some things do appear to line up with the trailers, but then again, other things do seem kind of out there. I'm not really a fan of Rey Palpatine, but it could make for some really interesting conflict for Rey if she has to come to terms with that and push her closer to Ben. Other leaks regarding Kylo siding with Palpatine to get to Rey to join him just to seem completely outlandish. Why in the world would Kylo give up his position as the one in charge to bow down to another master? Nope, not buying it. I would much rather we get Palpatine's spirit in a host. Also, something to note is the Knights of Ren aren't mentioned at all in these leaks. Yep. Sounds really fishy to me. There may be some truth, but I think a lot is pure speculation. And reverse Amidala as a callback to the prequels? Yes, please. That would be the perfect ending to the saga for me, and put a nice bookend on the whole thing. And what happiness at the end, and no bittersweet ending. After all, this is a space fairy tale. Also, please no ambiguity with Reylo. I don't want debates to continue past the rise of Skywalker. Oh, Amy, you know they're going to. Let the past die, LOL. Wouldn't it be something, though, if all these leaks were false and Disney Lucasfilm leaked this stuff intentionally to throw everyone off the scent and we get a completely different movie than we thought? I would love that. Yeah, and like I said, I mean, that's why I made the comment before we got into listener feedback this week, and thank you as always for the for your comment. Yeah, but you know what? You know what's funny? I go back to that article that I read earlier in the show about spoilers, and I think some of this stuff does get out there intentionally. I think some of it gets out there intentionally to prepare the fandom for what's coming next. That being said, we didn't get these kind of leaks for The Last Jedi. I went into that movie pretty darn fresh as to what was going to happen, so you never know. It's funny, and I'm going to wipe out here for just a second. I'm of the opinion, by the way, that when people mention J.J. Abrams and his mystery box, they get that all wrong. For those that don't know, I played this a long time ago, but J.J. Abrams did a TED Talk where he talked about a mystery box. And the mystery box that he was talking about was when he was discussing A New Hope. And he was talking about how the movie evolves and then something happens and, ooh, there's a mystery and you have to open it up. That's a mystery box. So, the droids arriving and having a message. Ooh, that's a mystery box. We have to open it up, right? Meeting Obi-Wan Kenobi and going to his home and him talking about, having to join him. Ooh, that's a mystery box. What's going to happen? People attribute that to J.J. Abrams and his mystery box and a mystery box mentality of keeping everything secret. All movies are kept secret. J.J. Abrams is no different. I only point this out because it's funny to me because of the two new directors, right? Well, I mean, out of all the movies, really, J.J. Abrams seems to be the one, if these leaks turn out to be true, that gets stuff leaked more often than all the other new directors do. So, okay. All right. Back on to a listener feedback. Mackenzie writes this. It's so interesting that you mentioned the movie Tangled. Okay. Forgot about this. Oh, I'm so excited. So I mentioned this last week. During the leaks part of it, I love Tangled, right? Tangled is one of my favorite new Disney era animated films. I love that movie. It's so much fun. But I mentioned this idea of Matt Smith and the aging of Palpatine, and I brought in the mom from Tangled and how she used her hair to keep her looking young. Okay, so anyways, after that happened, a bunch of other people started mentioning Tangled. Somebody else actually pointed out on Reddit how the story beats for Tangled are actually lining up specifically with The Rise of Skywalker. Then we found out that Daisy Ridley actually went and said that Tangled was her favorite Disney character, or Disney princess. Somebody asked her what her favorite Disney princess was, and she mentioned Rapunzel. Okay, sorry. I forgot about Mackenzie's comment until now. So this is what Mackenzie says. It's so interesting that you mentioned the movie Tangled. I just recently rewatched that movie and was shocked at all the Reylo parallels. It's about a girl raised in isolation that has magic abilities and is sunny and innocent but tough and intelligent, and a lonely boy with parental issues that does nefarious deeds that fate pushes them together. In time, they find themselves in each other. Also, Flynn Rider is a name he chose for himself in place of his given name of Eugene. Cough, Ben Solo. Also, the scene at the end where Flynn Rider saves Rapunzel by sacrificing himself, and she, in turn, brings him back to life, has me thinking about The Rise of Skywalker. Just an interesting thought. Wanted to point that out. Thank you, Mackenzie. I'm so glad you did, because I totally agree. All right, let's continue. Thank you, Mackenzie, by the way, again. Silver Maiden says this. Rey Kenobi makes more sense to me than Rey Palpatine. Is she helping to defeat her own, grandfather? I don't care for that. Also, if Palps manipulated the Force to impregnate Shmi, then it would almost make Rey and Ben like cousins, which I don't really like because I'm a Reylo shipper. I'm cool if they do it because I'll accept historical documents, as you say, but Rey Kenobi just seems to fit better and bring a more satisfying end with the history between Obi-Wan and Anakin. How beautiful would it be if their grandchildren defeated the ultimate evil and then went on to heal those family wounds by falling in love? That's just me, maybe, but I love it. I'd rather her be Rey Nobody than a Palpatine, though. Yeah, again, and like I said, it all depends on the execution. All right. I've always liked the Kenobi idea. I just don't know how you bring that in the final film without it being wonky. I don't know the pathway that arrives to that. All right. Miranda writes this. Let's see. Now, I know this will probably not relate to anything in the podcast, but I think it's worth a share this morning out of nowhere when I was doing errands with my mother. I told her that I was messaging a friend who thinks Kylo won't be redeemed. I told her I sent him a bunch of great videos to watch, and in addition, I had a very deep conversation with her about the true purpose of the sequel trilogy and how important the whole concept of redemption is in this saga, and why that's such an important to send in fiction, because it's what we want to see more in the real world. And I told her the reasons why Han died and why Luke did what he did on Crate. And I even said the possibility of Leia Organa and whatever they decide to do with her character in the movie at some point, if she does pass that will, in a way, help Ben go back to the light. And I mentioned to her how he was abused by Snoke since childhood, and is a victim of abuse. And I mentioned reminded her that despite everything that Darth has done, and at the last minute, he chose to save Luke's life in Episode 6. Furthermore, I told Mother that Star Wars is more of a fantasy space fairy tale, and that it echoes a lot of parallels and inspiration to other works of beauty, including Beauty and the Beast, Jane Austen, and Charlotte Bronte works. And some others even told her about the hero's journey and what it is. She had no idea what, that I was so, let's see, hold on. She had no idea that I gave her a breakdown of Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. It went for some time. And above all, and lastly, I mentioned that Star Wars, aside from everything, it contains action, so it is still a story about love and forgiveness. And she agreed that redemption is very important to have because at some point you have to change for the better. In addition, gave a shout out to all the wonderful channels I've watched. Thank you very much for the comment, Miranda, and that sounds like a wonderful conversation. All right. Friend of the show, Jordan Davis, says this. Let's see. I do agree with and see The Rise of Skywalker already taking some familiar stuff from the prequels, especially from Revenge of the Sith, with Rey and Ben fighting on the remains of the Death Star 2, with the waves and water around them instead of the lava and fire, meaning they could be giving us some major reverse Amidala. Yep. All right, Raylo Rising, as we get ready to wrap up, says this. I've always hated the Rey Palpatine theory. If she ends up being a Palpatine and Raylo happens, people are going to say from now until forever that they're related because of Palpatine manipulating midichlorians with Anakin. People are already saying it now in comments. We're 4 years and 2 movies in, and people still think they're siblings. Good grief, I hope JJ spares us that clownery. So a quick point on that. The Palpatine manipulating thing. From the comic book, I didn't get the impression that he impregnated Shmi. I got the impression that he was trying to influence Anakin from inside Shmi in the same way that Snoke influenced Ben while he was inside Leia. That's the impression that I got. She was still brought on by the Force, but it wasn't at the hands of Palpatine. Now, I need to go back and revisit that comic if that's the case. That being said, that's also a comment with one specific page and panel where that took place, and so I wouldn't put a lot of stock in that being used as something for the canon movies. All right. Last one is a fun one from a friend of the show, Shlomo, who says this. I really want to see Phasma get a cameo in 9. Phasma was in a garbage compactor when the planet blew up and managed to live. I doubt falling down several decks into a small conflagration just before a rebel cruiser slams into your ship with a hyperspace fold is going to even scratch her. Might as well keep the running joke. Maybe show up and declare to Finn, I'm invincible, just before being stepped on by an AT-AT or something. Yeah, I know. I'm seeing a therapist. Cordially, Shlomo. Shlomo knew that they were joking, so that's funny. All right. That's it for this week. Thank you so much for hanging out once again for the podcast. I really do appreciate it. As always, my quick plug for my science fiction space opera adventures. I do still have the ebooks for EMBARK Book 1 and EMBARK Treasure in Darkness Book 2, priced at 99 cents each for just the ebook. Now, that's important because a purchase of the ebook will get you the audiobook for either one at just $7.50. The audiobook for Treasure in Darkness should be available any hour now, to be honest with you. As a matter of fact, I'm going to do a quick look just while I'm talking to see if it's been made available yet. ACX Audible takes a while to get there. Once they approve it, it takes a while for it to get to retail, and I had to do some correcting to the audio files on Treasure in Darkness, so it took just a little bit longer. Now, it still looks like it's heading to retail. So, anyway, you can pick up either book right now at Amazon.com. You can also get the paperbacks as well. The paperback, with the purchase of the paperback, you can actually get the ebook for free. So, if you want to support the show, I would very much encourage you to go to Amazon.com and search for Jon Justice and pick yourself up a copy if you haven't done so already. All right, so no hard pitch this week. Just want to make sure I get it out there in case you haven't picked up the books yet. And if you have and you've read them and you've enjoyed them, please, 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 please go to Amazon.com and leave me a positive review. I really need some more positive reviews on EMBARK Treasure in Darkness. The reviews that I've received so far have been stellar. I just need more of them. That would really go and help me out. So if you purchased the book, enjoyed reading it, and haven't left a review yet, please go to Amazon.com right now and drop a review for either book, but especially book 2, Treasure in Darkness. And again, it would just mean the world to me. So thanks as always for all your support listening to the show and supporting my attempts to be a science fiction author. I really, really do appreciate it. Be back again next week. If you haven't downloaded the Blaster app yet, where you can record audio and post it like you would a tweet, either in the Blaster app or on Twitter or Facebook. You can go to the App Store, look for Blaster app, together as one word, and download the app. It's free. Create a profile. It's free. You can also go to the blasterapp.com website and check it out there. I'm posting blasts, audio blasts to Blaster and putting them up on Twitter almost daily with thoughts about Star Wars, breaking news on a number of different levels, so you can follow me there, My Nerd World or Jon, Jon Justice. Twitter as well, Jon, at Jon Justice, Jon, or at the My Nerd World on Twitter. Same thing goes for Instagram as well. All right, so there you go. Twitter, Facebook, you can find me there, Instagram, and then Blaster. Go buy my book, and I think I'm done. All right, I'm going to go watch some Star Wars. Have yourself a fantastic day, and I'll talk to you again next week.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.